Okay. Hi Gwyn, hopefully that's up and running now. I'll turn the camera around in a second. If you can hear me, I'll show you the high-tech result. Okay, cool. All right. I'll give you some test audio as well. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you hear that, Gwyn? 1, 2, 3, 4. Is the audio coming through? Test 1, 2, 3, 4.
So you're the tech guru, yeah?
Trying to be, yeah. Just trying to get everything up and running. We're just having issues getting bandwidth out of here. We're just seeing if it's working. Sound going a bit. We've got to try.
Oh,
Okay.
it's to live stream it.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. One, two, three, four. Okay, cool. All right, I'm gonna head up the front and test the mic up there, and then I'll test the questions mic. This is a test. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Gwen, can you hear that? Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hi Gwen, just checking that you can hear okay from the catch box. G'day mate. Good. Nice.
Is there a few issues with my video?
No issues with you. Once again. Hey, thanks Gwen. I think. Oops, sorry. Thanks Gwen. I think we're ready to go. I'll just going to shut the audio down now and leave it on the welcome slide. Thanks heaps for your help. So we. The only issue is that We do, but it's not very stable.
No worries.
Thank you. Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1,
Okay, can everybody hear that? We might make a start. Oh, well, it's a very warm welcome to you all. Just so lovely to see such a wonderful turnout, and hopefully you're going to really enjoy this day that we've put on for you. You know, a big thank you to Olivia to getting this all organised, and here we are. So, yeah, much appreciated. First of all, I just want to introduce our Farmer Council quickly, because so often, you know, you guys don't actually run into us that often. And so could the Farmer Councillors please stand up? And I'll just quickly introduce you. We've got Linda Taggart down the end, she's with Rabobank. We've got Alan Gorton, then we've got Simon Davies, Paul Corboy, Hayden Peter, Bill McCall, Graham Butcher, Nathan Paris, Kevin Nola, Wendy Hopcroft, Graham Evans. Is that all of us? That's all. So, yeah, no, thanks to all this team for helping out today as well. Can I also just say, before I forget, that we are looking for more councillors. So if anyone is keen, please see Olivia, myself, or any of that council team, and you'll be more than welcome to come on board. It's certainly a very enjoyable off-farm activity that I find very rewarding. I've actually forgot to introduce myself. I'm Hamish Belsky too, the local chairman for our Farmer Council. Now, farming is entering a new era with challenges that we haven't seen, like synthetic proteins, remember nylon, and environmental pressures. I sort of liken the 80s and 90s in our industry to the 2011, to the build-up to the 2011 World Cup, Rugby World Cup, where we lost a lot of games and we ground it out for a very long time before we finally got the win. I now see from here on, we've got the win at home, now we've got to win away. And that was the big challenge. And that's where I sort of see farming at the moment. So hopefully today we can get a little bit more information and skills onto how to take us through into over the next 5 to 10 years. And first up we have our guest speaker, Dr. Anna Campbell. You what? Okay, all right, we'll hand over to Olivia just to do the health and safety check, and then I'll come back to introducing Anna.
Hello everybody, and welcome. Just a little bit of housekeeping for today. In the event that we do need to leave this building, there will be no floor lighting, but there is plenty of escape points. And so whatever room you're in, go to the nearest one, and we're going to meet in the car park. Virtually where FMG is parked, if you just go beyond the insurance vehicles, that is where the safety point is. If you need to visit the toilets today, there is some through the main entrance if you've ever come to the reception of the main Croydon through the dining room, but otherwise there's some here where you came in. The first aid, there is some of that in the reception too, and at the kitchen. And if you want to jolt your neighbour or you need a little bit of the kiss of life with the defib, it's also located at the reception. Can I ask that you all have your phones either on silent or off today? And if you do have them on silent, if you could please turn your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth functions off, please. Just so we are live streaming out of here today, and we would like to be able to make sure that the connection is as great as we can be. So if you could all, not have 200 phones trying to find all the connections around here, that'd be great. Many thanks to all the stand holders that have come along today to be able to provide you some more information, as well as all the great speakers, which over 50% have travelled from the North Island. And hopefully there is a plane landing in Invercargill from Christchurch right now with a whole lot of them. This has been a real team effort, and very big thanks to the Southern Farmer Council for everything they've done to help put this event together. When you are in your rooms, the Farmer Councils will be able to guide you in regards to everything that's happening in those rooms. Please note that some rooms are being recorded. And also there is resources depending on what the topic is, that you can collect in those rooms. But if you miss out, there is another whole collection, the beef and lamb sort of resource table in the back of here. Stay Well are also here doing health checks today. So if you want to see if you've had a good breakfast or had too much sugar or not enough, want an excuse to be able to have some more lunch or some sugar later on, see them, they're doing some checks through here. So I encourage you, to go and take advantage of that free service. Otherwise, if you need anything in regards to first aid or anything today, see myself or Laura Lake, who is the other extension manager here, who's going to pop her hand through the door, or anyone at the reception, or find any hotel staff. Otherwise, anything today, if you see anyone with a green lanyard, they are staff or farmer council, and have any issues, just go see them. If you don't have a lanyard on, which hopefully you all do, means you'll get fed. So make sure you keep that on you all day so that we can make sure that we get everybody through lunch, because there is people just arriving to see certain sessions today as well. But otherwise, have a great day, and I'll hand back to Hamish. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. So, back to introducing Anna. She has a scientific background from which she has transitioned into business leadership and governance. She is a managing director of Abacus Bio, an agri-technology company with offices in Dunedin and Edinburgh, of all places, where she leads a team of over 30 specialised consultants and several graduate students. Anna is also a director of Otago Innovation Limited, Genomics Aotearoa, and Otago Cricket Association, and a trustee of Otago Boys High School. So I want to welcome Anna, and she's going to sort of set the scene for where we're heading into the future. Thank you, Anna.
Well, morning everyone. It's absolutely fabulous to see such a great group of people. I have to admit to feeling a little anxious this morning, because last time I gave a talk in this dress, I sat down at the end of the presentation and realised I'd given the entire presentation with my zip undone. So I promise you I'm fully dressed today, and today we're going to, I really want to start off by taking you around the world and then focusing in on what's the status for our industry now, and where do we go in the future. Did anyone watch the Sunday program? I think it was last weekend, not this weekend, the weekend before, about synthetic meat. What did you think? Scary? Unbalanced? Yeah. And how did it make you feel? Frustrated? Angry? Has anyone heard Rosie Bosworth speak? How did that make you feel? Frustrated? So the first time I heard Rosie speak, and I think she's doing a fantastic job at making us think outside the square and pushing us to think differently. But the first time I heard her speak, I got very, very angry, and it was an absolute defence reaction. And I thought about my reaction after that presentation, and that, our reaction to being under threat is fight or flight. And so part of that defence reaction of feeling angry is part of that fight reaction. And that's a good thing, because it actually galvanises us into doing something. But it's also really important because it makes us think about where some of the flaws in our industry are and what we need to do about that. I am very upset about the unbalanced presentation of the agricultural industry that's happening at the moment. And we have to do more in many ways to redress that balance, and we can talk about that a little bit later as we go through the presentation. In New Zealand, the Impossible Burger, what were your thoughts on that? Ridiculous? Pissed off? Would you try that burger? I'm dying to try it. I haven't tried it yet. I've heard that it's absolutely fantastic when it's warm and hot, but it's pretty awful when it's cold. But again, it makes you think, this is what we're competing against. How do we challenge that? How do we come up with our own products? What do we need to do? And this is the kind of rhetoric that is starting to go around, and it's very strong in our urban centres, and I think particularly some of the young people coming through are saying things like New Zealand is in danger of fast becoming the Detroit of agriculture, a rust belt left behind after production has moved elsewhere. It's pretty scary. And how many of you farmed through the 80s? That's the big thing that absolutely is very important for me in thinking about that and thinking we've been through this before. Fundamentally, food is food and the world needs food, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But we do need to sit up and take notice of this, and we need to look at things like the wool industry and say, well, where did they go wrong and how can we make sure that we don't go the same way? So let's understand a little bit more about the actual products that are coming out. And I think what's quite confusing is that there's a massive array of products. So there's finless food, that's a fish company. There's sun-fed chicken, which we saw on the Sunday program. There are enormous amounts of product. There's synthetic milks. But in terms of the red meat front, there's also a whole bunch of labels. So there's straight plant-based red meat type products. There's straight synthetic meat, and I'm going to talk about them in a moment. And then there's this incredibly emotive term called clean meat, which is being used very widely. And I wanted to explore that a little bit as well. We're being presented with this as if it's something new. We shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or wing by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium. 1932, Winston Churchill. This is not a new concept. What is very, very different now is that these types of products, and we've been having veggie burgers and chickpea type burgers for generations, but they've been sitting in the vegetarian aisle. And if you go to a supermarket, that's still where you will find them. So vegetarian sausages, they're being sold to a certain less than 5% sector of the population. The difference now is that the synthetic guys, so these people, are going after the mainstream consumer. And that's a really, really big shift. And they are quite honest about that. They're saying that is the difference. They are going after the 95% of people who eat meat. So looking a little bit at how there's a whole lot of layers and there's different parts of this, but if I just explain to you at a very high level what cellular agriculture is. So cellular agriculture is fundamentally taking the cells from a live animal and putting them into a growing medium. And at the moment, that growing fetal FSAB, you know the stuff, blood, fetal serum, the name is just going from me. But it contains that at the moment. They're working very, very hard so that there's no animal products in that medium. They then take that and they grow these cells on scaffolding type arrangements so that they can start becoming more like muscle in terms of how they scaffold their ways up. And then they have these huge bioreactors and they pump out what essentially is cellular or meat, which has been derived from this cellular medium. Down the bottom corner there's a whole lot of YouTube clips which you can go if you want to learn more about the fundamentals of what cellular agriculture is. Just had one of our to say a lot of it isn't the fetal. This year there wasn't. Relatively what he would call an R&D exercise, in that there's still some pretty big problems that they need to overcome. And one of the people who spoke at the conference got up and put his hand up and said to the people in the room, he said, you know, you people are biologists and you're treating this problem like a biology problem, when actually the biggest challenge for you to get this to market is the scaling. So it's that bioengineering type of science and structure that's really holding them back at the moment. We can produce these types of products, we just cannot produce, or they cannot produce them at scale to the type of the cost that a consumer might pay for them. But there's huge investment money going in, and obviously the Bill Gates and the Richard Bransons and those types of people are investing flat out. It's one of the hot topics in terms of US investment. So you can imagine that this type of money going in, there will be some results at some point. There's a really good quote by Bill Gates, and I think it's quite pertinent here. We always overestimate what we can get done in 2 years, and we underestimate what we can get done by 10 years. So I think we're looking at that kind of 2 to 5 to 10 year window. So the Impossible Burger, this is the Air New Zealand one. I just want to delve into that. Have you heard a little bit about some of the negativity against the burger? So this is quite interesting. So the Impossible Burger is actually made up, so it's a plant-based burger, and it's made of wheat, coconut fat, and then they've got this protein called soy leg myoglobin form. So in meat, myoglobin form, that's in it, and this is the myoglobin molecule up here, and that little red unit there is a heme unit. And so when the myoglobin gets heated, that heme moves around, and that's part of our flavour profile. So what they did was then go and look at a whole lot of plant hemoglobin proteins and try to find the one, which was, or the ones that were most similar in taste and characteristic to myoglobin. And that's when they found the soy leg hemoglobin. And the soy leg hemoglobin actually comes out of the root of the soy plant, which is not something which humans normally eat. And so what they did then was basically go out and tell everyone, well, yep, we've found this protein that we can use in our burgers, and it means our vegetable burgers taste just like meat burgers, and this is the soy leg hemoglobin. But they were a little bit opaque in how they were generating this protein, because if you were actually going to generate enough of this protein for all the burgers that they're going to need to produce, it would be enormously expensive to extract these proteins from soybean roots. And so what they actually did, or what they're doing, is genetically modifying yeast. So they're putting and you don't quite know what they're doing, but they're probably putting genes from the soy plant into yeast and genetically engineering yeast so that it pumps out the soy leg hemoglobin. And so that's the genetic engineering part of it. Now it's really, really interesting because I'm comfortable with genetic engineering, but a lot of consumers aren't. And this is an attack point, and it's starting to come out a lot more now, and people are questioning their transparency around it all. And the FDA is also saying, well, actually, we've never necessarily approved that these are safe for human consumption. We're not saying they're unsafe, but there's a big debate happening. And what I find really, really fascinating is that many of the people who would be really, really against agriculture using genetic engineering techniques are kind of blissfully ignoring this. And it just makes me wonder, us as humans, we're very good at shoveling things under the carpet when it suits us. But this is a very, very interesting phenomenon, and it will be really, really interesting to follow how this goes. So back to the big picture, I guess. There's a lot of science behind this, and it's, I find that fascinating, but there's also a lot of big business dollars. But what I find even more interesting on top of this is that, the Richard Bransons of the world are coming out with statements like this. I believe that in 30 years or so, we will no longer need to kill any animals, and that all meat will either be clean or plant-based, taste the same, and also be much healthier for everyone. They are huge statements, and these people have huge followers. There's an attack on the industry at a number of levels. So we're talking about animal welfare. We're talking about meat being clean, which is indicating and demonstrating now that meat is not clean and it's environmentally unfriendly. We're talking about this kind of meat being healthier, which again is making the assumption that the meat we're eating as part of our everyday diets is not healthy. Huge, huge statements. And this is the kind of, while we've got all the science that we've got to be aware of, we've also got to be aware of this really emotional kind of language around this whole topic. Whew. Does that make you feel any better? So I rack my brains, and I'm sure every single one of you do as well. You know, how do we respond as an industry? And I really, really worry, you know, when I kind of get that we have to go after Air New Zealand when they bring out the Impossible Burger, but I really, really, really worry that we come across as a whinging kind of negative industry. And I don't see this industry as being in a negative position. And I'm going to explore that a bit more with you now. But just one comment that Charles made after his visit to this New Harvest conference was one of the guys that he was chatting with at morning tea, or where it might be said, and Charles was saying where he was from, and he said, well, New Zealand, you don't have anything to worry about with any of this. And Charles said, oh, well, why do you say that? You know, our whole industry is based on protein export. And he said, yeah, but you're not factory farming. And that is a huge, huge critical difference, which we are going to be doing more about in terms of telling that story. But the other side of it, in terms of, you know, how do we respond? So I've kind of put all the negative stuff up front, because now I'm going to come up with some positive stuff. Annual meat production is projected to increase from 218 million tonnes to 376 million tonnes by 2030. And I know a few of you have seen this photo because I use it in lots of presentations, but can anyone tell me what kind of protein farm that is? It's about an hour outside of Beijing. It's actually a sheep farm, yeah. And if you guys did the numbers on how that might work logistically in terms of cost of feed and cost of concrete and everything else, you would just go, no, these are never going to take off. But what you're probably not thinking about is that the Chinese government wants to ensure that they have food security, so they will invest in these type of farms, and there will be more and more of this type of farming around the world for protein. But there is a massive increasing demand for protein, and you just look at the rise and look at the statistics around Chinese demand for protein. What are you guys getting paid per kilogram of lamb right now? $8? Yeah, it'll crash by Christmas, of course. I don't. I have no knowledge. I'm just teasing. I really have no idea what's going to happen. But you know, where China's on the up, and other parts of throughout Asia, Africa is getting more. When you actually, if you ever want to do some exploration around countries that are on massive growth curves, explore some of the African countries because they're going gangbusters. And what we tend to see when countries grow in wealth is that with that becomes a wish to eat more high quality food, and with that an increase in protein consumption. Anyone know who this lady is, the lady on your left? Her name is Laura Vitale. She is probably the most influential food person who's followed in terms of the food world in the United States. It's extraordinary, isn't it? None of us know who she... the first time I saw her, I had no idea who she was. Massive food influencer. All YouTube channels, and then obviously now huge sponsorship. And when you hear it, so she does a kind of casual cooking in the kitchen at home, and she's super dynamic and lovely and warm, and she's at one of the biggest influencers in the world in terms of food right now. And look at this on the left, meet your new boss. It says, I can't even read it because my eyes aren't good enough, but it says mums, bloggers and foodies. These millennials are driving the new food and the ag economy. So this is who we've got to be thinking about in terms of our product. And we can do this, and this is what I think is really exciting when you start to look at some of the other trends that are happening as well. Something which I brought up briefly before, but I think is really interesting, and I was just listening to the radio on the way down here about Iran and Donald Trump, and you know, this trade and where trade sits, and these are things we have to watch out for. But they're also a really, really big opportunity. And when you travel in countries in Asia and you realise how dependent they are on outside food, and especially with these big growing populations, then as a food trading nation, that has to stand in terms of a card in our back pocket for productive trade relationships with countries. It's obviously complex, But I think as food exporters, our place in the world should be secure on that front. This is something that I'm very, very passionate about in terms of a food trend which will play into our favour. So do any of you wear a Fitbit? Yeah, they're terrible devices really. When you sign up for a Fitbit or any of these types of devices, you willingly give away a whole lot of information to this company. So I've told them my weight, my age, two things I don't normally share, and my goals in terms of what I want to do and exercise. And they collect all this data off me through my heartbeat and movements and everything. And they know how many times I get up at night to go to the toilet. They know that I did 24,000 steps on a dance floor in Singapore. Quite proud of that. and you know, after a couple of cocktails in only 2 hours, so I was very proud. But anyway, when you think about this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the types of technologies that we're going to be wearing. And our animals are the same. So we're going to be wearing things in our blood that are going to give blood signals and all sorts of things to these types of companies. And there's another company up there. The other photo is a genomic company called Habit Personalised Food. And they are a company in the States. They're a startup. Some of the genomic science behind them is a little bit sketchy. But you can send your blood and they will analyse your DNA with some markers, and then they'll let you know what type of diet based on your DNA markers you should be eating. So that's where we're heading. Now, when we think about the health attributes of protein, then our ability to start fitting foods to these types of personalised diet then becomes a pretty exciting opportunity for us. And finally, I want to finish, because I think we forget this. Well, I'm not finishing yet, you're still only halfway through. But how much time have I got? So I just don't, I've got heaps, okay. So I want to just remind us, because I think we forget about this one, and especially I do, because I'm a scientist, so I get all wound up in the analytics. But this is actually my family at Christmas time. So down here is my gorgeous daughter, and she's a foodie like me, so she loves being in the kitchen. And there are my sons up there, and they love eating the products. And there are my nieces over there, and they've got a sweet tooth. So this is Christmas Day in our house. So why should I show you this? But the reason I show you this is that we forget that there's an enormous, food plays an enormous role in our daily life on an emotional front. And my daughter turned 13 last Saturday, and on their birthdays, they're allowed to choose their dinner. So I said, what do you want for your dinner? And she said, I want lamb. Pretty cool. And so we spent all afternoon on producing this beautiful Mediterranean lamb dish with harissa sauce and yogurt. And, you know, it was an absolute sensation. And round the dinner table, we all sat and celebrated this 13th birthday. Now, for the life of me, I cannot imagine doing the same with a synthetic meat product in terms of that festivity, bringing family together, me as a mother showing love to my family, you know, all the things that we wrap with food. And this is not just our culture. So I've travelled a lot in China, and when you sit around the banquet table, every single dish has an extraordinary story. It has a story of where that food has come from, but it also has a story of how that food gives health or well-being. And these are super, super important for these traditional types of food. And so they're really, really important for us to tap into the fact that food is a really big emotional part of bringing community together. And I don't think some of these other products are going to be able to do so in the same way as some of our beautiful protein. So with that in mind, I want to really nail down, I guess, what I think are the two dividers of food trends. So where food really sits in terms of the trends that we need to be chasing as an industry. And number one is the bluff oyster. It's the undone food. So food being undone basically means it's going back to nature, and it's going back to simple, and it's people believing that this food is clean or has a nutrient label that is minimal. So you know when you buy a product from the supermarket and it's got like something like baked beans or some sort of processed food and it's got a list that long. People want to buy food that has a tiny list in terms of no food additives and all those kinds of things. So that's the undone food trend. We want to go back to what our grandmothers and our grandfathers and even cavemen ate in terms of thinking about the paleo diet. The other big trend that we have to be looking at is the redone food. So undone versus redone. And Redone is the synthetic meat products, but there's also other types of products that we can be tapping into. And that's thinking about connecting all up this food and health and how we tie into that. So Beef and Lamb are doing, I think, a really, really great job in terms of this new branding that they have developed, and Nick Beebe is going to talk later, so I won't go into any of that. But it's about this transparent, beautiful product from nature brought for you and your family to celebrate. And that, you know, that is a very, very big place for New Zealand to be playing in. And we do have an advantage, but we're not the only one in terms of competing with other countries around this space. We have a huge advantage going into countries like China. If you're in the middle of a skyscraper in Beijing, the thought of food coming from a New Zealand beautiful farm is completely foreign. And but we're not the only countries that do. We're up against Ireland, we're up against Australia, we're up against other parts of Europe. And so we do have to play this game well, and I really endorse what Beef and Lamb are doing on this front. I think it's really super positive. But now I really want to focus for the rest of my talk really on what the opportunities are in what I'm calling the redone category. Because I would hate to think that New Zealand missed out on redone food, and I also think in terms of the health benefits of red meat, there's enormous opportunity for us to play in this category as well. So if I really look down now at proteins and the 4 categories that they sit in, the real food, that's what I've just talked about. The real food is the undone food. Plant-based meat substitutes, synthetic meat, and the 4th one is what what we're calling in our company composite or functional food. And that's the place that I would like to see a lot more thought going into in terms of how we really invest as an industry in this space. And this, again, comes back to this whole food for health concept. So Nestle, one of the biggest food companies in the world, are actually developing what they call clinical food products. So right down to clinical testing of how these food products make a difference to people in their everyday lives. It's a massive growth area, but there's spaces that we can play, and we have to look to create our innovative ecosystem around that. So the first thing that we need to do to really play in this space is actually really, really understand the functional components of our whole meat carcass and products. And we're doing this in bits and pieces, but you'd be surprised, I think, in terms of looking at the literature, at how little is known around, not so much, we really, really understand what's in meat itself, but what we don't necessarily do is take that next step and understand what that meat does in terms of a vulnerable person diet or an athlete's diet. We haven't really done enough of that clinical work. And just to give you an example, I know you probably can't see about that, but this just came out a couple of weeks ago from Chogus, which is an Irish organisation that we actually do work with. But this was a really nice piece of research where they're looking at the impact of meat on healthy ageing. So they're looking at an over 65 category of people, and they are doing a whole lot around how they might process meat or how they might present meat and the impact that that meat has on the diet, but also relating that to textures and the types of products that they could be producing. And if you think about it, it makes sense. An older person, I'm thinking an 80-plus-year-old, very frail, is not going to be able to sit down to a huge steak. But when they're losing muscle mass, and I think of my grandmother who died in her 90s, you know, she was my kind of build all her career, or all her life, and then when she was in her 90s, she got down to, you know, 50 kilos, and so it's going to happen at some point. But but anyway, but for her, at that stage of her life, that really, really high nutrient-dense protein becomes very, very important. So for her to be able to have that in a form that she can digest, that gives her the energy she needs, is also really, really critical. So understanding that and knowing that about our products and targeting our meat accordingly. I was pretty excited to see, it's not in the red meat industry, but I was pretty excited to see that sheep milk is going into clinical trials with AgResearch, and I think it's Landcorp, their spring sheep dairy. So this is the kind of things that we need to be taking our products to that next level. And the other opportunity, I think, is to really look at what else is out there in New Zealand and determine what we can be complementing our meat products with. And I was really lucky enough to travel around a lot around China with one of the people that set up, Kelvin Bedzaudenhout, one of the people that set up Zespri marketing in China in the very early days, did a lot of that early work. But what really stunned me when he was telling me about the story about how Zespri, how they took it into China, is how much they really focused on health and vitality as their main selling points. And that was on the back of clinical trials that they had done in New Zealand. So they'd done clinical trials in New Zealand where they had looked at the impact of kiwi fruit on the digestive system, and then they'd gone into China and done the same kind of trial work alongside Chinese government scientists so that they could then tell the story to Chinese people alongside Chinese government of the huge impact that kiwi fruit has on human health. So we can jump on the back of that kind of work and develop the kind of products that are super high in iron and vitamin B and everything that meat has, but also have some of these really exciting digestive type properties that, for example, kiwi fruit have, or even there's apple fibre there. So these types of products. And I think the fruit industry in New Zealand is really taking off on this front. Here's another example of a company. This is out of a company, Anagenics, and it's called Berry She, and they are developing products around lung health. So there's some really interesting scientific evidence that an extract from boysenberries improves some sort of respiratory function. So these are the kind of opportunities that we say, well, okay, how do we align ourselves with that, and how do we create a product that has these kind of features? I really like this story. This is a New Zealand company called Pure Food Co. Has anyone heard of them or come across their products? They're relatively new, but they're started up by some young guys out of Auckland, and their stepfather had mouth cancer. And he was a real foodie, and they were pretty horrified at what was available for him to eat as a foodie. And so they've developed this wonderful company that actually produces beautiful pureed food in a really, really nice way. And again, this is looking at those target markets and saying, well, where can our meat products take us? So really, I think as an industry, how do we do this? How do we go forward? And we do have a lot of challenges. These are really value-add type approaches. So we talk about the premium, and the premium is our undone. But if we're really going to add value, we really, really need to have a very good R&D environment. We need to have a clear idea of where we're going. And if we're at, say, I would say positively we're at about 5% value add as an industry now, but I doubt we're even that high. And I'm talking value add here, not premium. If we're 5% now, what would it take us as an industry to get to 20%? What would that mean in terms of income? What would that mean in terms of investment? What kind of people do we need, and what R&D do we need? And for everyone in this room, what could we do to help us get there? And that's what I think we need to start talking about. So I read a lot about innovation, and I've never come across anything quite as good as Jim Collins' book, but he's got this great concept which I really relate to, is that when you're innovating, we want to fire a bunch of bullets. We want to have a look at a whole lot of products for a whole lot of markets and invest in a whole lot of what he called bullets. And when we find the bullet that finds its way, that's actually got legs, then we fire a great big bloody cannonball. And I think, I love that concept, because I think we've been a little bit hopeful that our big industry players, our big companies are going to get us out of some of this stuff. But actually, it might be these types of companies that get us out of it. And I'll talk in a little bit in a moment about what other companies are doing in terms of buying that kind of innovation. So we do have, I'll skip that slide. So I think change is hard. And 1530 Machiavelli, for he who innovates will have for his enemies all those who are well off under the existing order of things. And when I think about our big companies, and I'm not denigrating our big companies, our big meat companies. That previous slide was really about they've got these big steel structures. They have to drive procurement through to make money. That's fundamentally their game. They'll do a bit of innovation around the edge, but can we really expect them to be driving, in terms of the main drive of their business, this other type of innovation that we need? And I'm not sure, I think perhaps we're asking too much, and we actually have to find our innovation elsewhere. And our innovation can come from our local communities. I'm pretty excited about this regional development thing. I'm not a politician or anything, but I think it's got legs for small communities. That's a wee aside. But anyway, just to give you some examples to, I think, again, hold out that hope. These types of innovative companies are already in New Zealand, and they're already in agriculture. On Left there is a company, Lanico. Have any of you heard of Lanico? So they're producing fabulous, with some good science and some good breeding and a whole lot of really good fundamentals. They're producing a wool fibre and combining it with other fibres for air filter systems and air conditioners, but also for face masks in Asia. And they've got Karen Walker to design that fabulous face mask so that Asians don't have to walk around with those ugly white masks. So pretty cool. Rocket apples, those tiny little apples. Plant variety rights came out of Plant and Food. A couple of guys basically went and bought the plant variety rights and marketed this rocket apple. So it's a small apple with a small core that people can put in their lunch boxes and things like that. And they're doing really, really super all over the world. Allbird shoes, anyone got a pair of them? Yeah, I live in my pair. Fabulous story again, wool shoe, sustainable, everything else that goes with it. You know, we are innovating, but it's not necessarily coming from where we expect innovation to come. And our innovators are going to be people that we may not expect them to be. And these are some of the people in my organisation from all over the world, a huge amount of fun, and they will challenge things and question things and do things differently. And if you think about it, if you think about Laura Vitale being the biggest food influencer in the United States, a food influencer could be coming out of your kitchen and they could only be 8 years old right now. But that's the kind of reach that these kind of influencers can have. If they started, one of your kids, for example, started to go out and talk about farming in New Zealand and what it means to them and what it means around food, imagine if they actually did it in a Laura Vitale type way, what kind of following they could get. And what that requires in terms of that innovation mindset is that it does require people to be able to take risks, and we have to create that ecosystem. So I think small communities are perhaps more open to that kind of risk, because as farmers you're used to risk, you're used to business risk, and I don't think that necessarily in our big organisations they're necessarily used to taking those kind of risks. We have to allow for failure. When you try a new crop, you don't go out and plant your whole farm in it, you plant small areas in it because you know that there's going to be things that won't work. And we have to be able to share information. And when I look at those people, I just give this example of the sharing environment as an example of the kind of openness that we have around innovation now. So if you think about, as a scientist, I've always been taught around intellectual property and keeping everything a secret. The new generation of scientists share everything in a quite different way. So this is a software, I don't know, would you call it software? It's a company called R, this thing here. And we've, as buying this software called, thank you Simon, SAS. And it costs us a software license for years, and I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars every year, and it drives us nuts that we have to pay for the statistical analysis software. Now, all the young people in our organisation just go on and get onto the shared system where people put all their code into this, and I don't really entirely know how it works, but they share all this code so that they can get their code out, analyse their data, and they're not paying any kind of software fees, and they're sharing all this information. It's kind of mind-blowing, thinking, well, how do you take that sharing into your sector and think about how do we share more to grow bigger together? And the really cool thing is that some of the older people in our organisation are so embarrassed that they're not doing this, that they've had to upskill and move out of SAS, so our SAS licence costs are going down, so I'm pretty excited about that. But so just to flip back then, how do you then take these small companies and make them big? So the PureCos, those types of companies, how do we then scale that innovation to the size that we need it? And you look internationally, Tyson, Cargill, JBS, National Beef, the biggest meat companies in the world. Tyson and Cargill are flat out investing in synthetic meat. So they are some of the biggest investors in synthetic meat. JBS is now 51 owner of one of our most innovative companies in New Zealand, Scott Technology. These people will go out and buy innovation. And I think some of our big companies need to be doing more of the same. And that's really where I want to end. But I really want to, I guess, throw the challenge out to you is not to necessarily go back and think this whole world of synthetic meat, there's nothing we can do. We've just got to carry on and wait for it to hit us. I think there are things that we can do, and I think sometimes then they can be small things, so it can just be about equipping our children to go and talk about the health benefits of red meat and actually starting those conversations. But it can also be about generating these kind of innovation clusters in our communities and working out how we work with those innovation clusters to make them scale and help those big guys potentially buy them to help them scale. So now I can throw it out for questions and hopefully some good discussion. Thanks.
Catch game before you get there, okay? Pass the first test. And sometimes you need to, I don't know, just as a farmer, I like analysing different things. These guys are using genetic modification. We as farmers know that there's a new grass out that's been genetically modified, I think it's the correct term, where the grass roots are deeper, that will protect us in a dry, whereas the sheep that are eating it let off less methane production, sheep, animals, whatever, and that it grows twice as fast as what we've currently got. Now, that ticks the green, clean image that New Zealand has got. So, knowledge is always gained, and going forward, you can't continue to do what you've always done because you'll always get what you've always got. All the cliches in the world. How can we use some of these things to move our industry forward and make better use of it as farmers?
It is a good question, and the crop that he's talking about is a ryegrass modification coming out of ag research that they are now trialling in the States and in South America. I think that you can find information on the Farmers Weekly. It is a traditionally modified plant, so it is. There are genes that are brought in from somewhere else and put into that plant, and that is probably the genetic technology that people are most uncomfortable with. There's newer technologies coming out now that we're calling gene editing, which are when you can just go into the genome of a plant or animal and edit a particular gene in that plant or animal. And they are being treated differently in the United States and Australia, and that they're not being treated as genetically modified. So there's a whole stable of tools and technologies that we could be using. We know that we get consumer backlash around agricultural manipulation of plants and animals. And a lot of that stems, I think, from the belief that it's the Monsantos getting bigger, as well as fear around public health and safety. So my belief is that actually it'll take something like an Impossible Food Burger and a few other food products which people are more comfortable with, that will hopefully make people a little bit more comfortable with the technology that may then allow us to bring them into a production system. I don't believe we're going to be able to, in this country, bring those types of technologies into a production system until something happens in terms of consumer acceptance on that front.
Sorry, firstly, apologies to those people in the room who might have heard this question from me before, but getting back to cellular technology, they seem to have forgotten energy. When we grow feed, it comes from the sun. The sun's basically free. We put a bit of diesel in maybe. So what do you know about how, if you're going to put a cell in a lab and grow it into energy, actually, a lot of people don't want energy in their food because they want to stay skinny, so they just want cardboard that tastes like something or other. So what do you know about the energy going into these foods, please?
So I actually had a slide on that and took it out. But all the stats that are coming out now are demonstrating that the cellular production systems are much lower in energy use, but they are compared to a housed animal environment, which is very different to our environment. And again, this is where actually Mark Espin's here. He'll be able to talk about this a bit more later in terms of how we actually account for our carbon in our system. So if your animals are eating what I call cellulose that can be used for not much else, and they're using sun and they're using water that comes from up high, so they're not irrigating, then they should have a lower footprint than a housed animal. So this again goes really back to our undone philosophy. We have to, in terms of our undone philosophy, that's what we need to celebrate, but we also need to put the data around that to show that the life cycle of animals in this type of system has a much lower environmental impact than those that are eating corn that could have been used for human consumption. So I think the numbers do not stack up very well when you compare them to that factory system, but we've got to be coming out with our own numbers to be able to fight that argument for our type of product.
Anna, it was a great talk. Just regarding Cargills and Tyson's investing in the plant-based technology, are they looking at that as an opportunity, or are they saying, well, factory farming stuff, we better get into something else? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know, and I suspect it's a bit of both. I suspect it's a bit of both. I think they probably, in terms of thinking about food systems, they have factories. They have all the market systems to be able to take food out on a global front. So you would have to be, if you're in a company like that, saying, well, what is our existing infrastructure, and what else could we be feeding through that infrastructure? And you would have to look at any protein product when you're thinking about that. So because they've got all that infrastructure, they may as well use it for alternate protein. In terms of, do they believe that factory farming's finished? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I believe it yet, especially when you see those kind of stats coming out of Asia and India. I think we definitely will move to a more what they call flexitarian model, where we save our meat for more of our special dinners, and we have more of those meat alternatives during the week. But I'm not sure that we're going to completely replace with cellular ag.
One of the things driving especially millennials in their food choices is the actual carbon footprint of the food. It doesn't seem that in New Zealand we're making the most of telling our story about our carbon footprint, which is probably quite low compared to, like, if you make concrete and make a sheep farm entirely out of concrete, the carbon footprint of concrete is incredible.
Yeah.
Plus all of the other stuff, whereas we're working almost entirely with soft systems and culture and biology.
One of the problems around this is that when you go to share your carbon footprint, there are a whole lot of methodologies. So some carbon footprints will include the concrete production and others won't. And so I absolutely agree, we've got to be supporting this with data. And I think we did a huge amount of this about 10 years ago when the emissions trading scheme was really prevalent, and we did a lot of research around this, and then we kind of have tailed off a little bit, and now I think it's on the up again. And Mark will probably be able to talk a little bit more about that, but I think we are now revisiting this. But you know, there's all sorts of factors. Like another one, and as an example of that, wool is given generally quite a high carbon number. But if you actually think of wool, it's a biodegradable product and it's reusable, and so in terms of its life cycle, it should be given a much lower carbon footprint than their plastic type product. So this is this whole complexity around how we calculate. So we've got to be going on the attack with some of these types of numbers and stories.
Well, as a country, we could define, you know, an ideal, the Dutch model. There's a Dutch model for total footprint analysis, including carbon. And there is a really good team in New Zealand doing that type of work. They were underfunded for a while, I think, and now the funding's on the up again. So hopefully we can get back into more of that telling of our story. But it may also flip back to you people on farm as well, in terms of actually being able to calculate carbon footprints on farm. We've got tools to do that, but I think it will hopefully get to the kind of level where we actually have evidence-based data to show that we are doing better than the international average. And it's also a very good proxy for all kinds of other carings for the environment too.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Be brave and throw it.
I think one thing that Rosie Boswell didn't mention when she was promoting the fake meat is that to grow in the U.S., to grow the maize and soy that goes into these products results in the loss of between 6 and 8 pounds of topsoil for every pound of food grown. So there's no way that fake meat can ever be more sustainable than protein grown on pasture, where their energy is coming directly from the sun and harvested by the grass and then put into the animals. And I think it's important that the dairy and the meat industry look at that and tell their own story, because it's all propaganda coming out of these large companies. The reason companies in the U.S. like Tyson Foods, that they sound like meat companies, but the reason they make heaps of money is because the meat in the U.S. is produced from this already subsidized maize and soybean. So It's always been a cash cow for these large companies. And remember when they came out with margarine, which was another fake food, they also had a marketing campaign which was bad-mouthing dairy and dairy products, and it turned out that grass-fed butter was always healthier for us. So you need to create a good story and tell it, because they're going to outcompete you in the marketplace because they're really good at marketing.
Yeah, I agree, but I do think that those grain-fed animals will be the ones that go under pressure first, and they're really the ones that are playing more in that commodity space. So we don't want to be in that commodity ground beef kind of space. But I'll also, just to add to that, I think with any kind of food system, when you go too hard at any type of food system, and we're seeing a little bit with dairy at the moment, then other things will happen. And there's a really interesting stats around almond milk production. So almond milk production, you know, great health story and taking off as an alternative to cow's milk, but it's grown in quite a condensed area in California, and it requires a lot of irrigation. And so they were actually getting the grounds shifting because of the amount of irrigation they were using in a drought year to produce the almonds for the milk. So I think it's like anything. When you go to extreme production or push the limits of things, then things start to tip. And it is about us being able to back with a really good story around how we do produce our protein. So I couldn't agree more.
I was just interested in your opinion on the names meat and milk. Are they something we should be holding sacrosanct and really fighting for, or are they just a distraction that's stopping us from getting on with innovating?
I honestly think they're a distraction. I would love to think that we can fight them, but I think it's probably too late. And if you look at milk, so any of them, I mean, milk the definition of milk is that it comes from, it's a mammalian, it's secreted by mammalian. I looked it up. And so it can't physically then come from a plant. And so there are debates in the States, and there are, I think some of the big guys are going after some of these meat around this. You know, let them, but let's not us get distracted by that, would be my answer. And it's a little bit like that Air New Zealand thing as well. It's just kind of let them, and let's focus on what we need to focus in terms of being positive as an industry. I worry that as soon as you go after those attack positions, you actually lessen your own position, because people think, oh, look, they're just trying to fight for their own system and da-da-da. Actually, put our energy into creating what's positive about our industry.
Yeah, hi Anna. Has anyone actually crunched the numbers? These synthetic products, they're all arable grown products, and there's an opportunity perhaps just in the cereals and potato side of it. We can't grow soya, and that's restricted to decimating the rainforest in Brazil and losing land in the US, as we've just heard. Has anyone actually crunched the numbers on the sustainability of that and replacing protein on the non-arable areas and where we grow and where the balance comes out?
Yes, I have crunched the numbers compared with factory farming, but not so much on our type of systems, and they're the kind of numbers that we need to be putting up. The problem is, even on our type of systems, I'm still not sure we would stack up. So we have to crunch those numbers, but maybe compare them to a factory alternative, and then tell the story of the natural sun and the cellulose being used for protein that wouldn't otherwise be eaten.
Okay, we're going to. We've got to move on to our next sessions, but yeah, thank you very much, Anna. That was exceptional. Good start for the day, and I'd just like to give her a thanks.
Right, guys, so now we're moving into the first pick and mix session. So if you're wanting to hear the taste, pure nature of the red meat story and continue those conversations with Nick Beebe, you stay in this room. If you're wanting to see Dr. Lydia Cranston in early weaning of lambs, it's just through the conference room we've come in. And if you are wanting to go Life After Farming with Rhodes Donald, you head to room 3 through back here. If you get to a room and there isn't enough chairs, you'll need to come back and take one from the back. We've used all the chairs in the Croydon. So we might just have to move around to start with. But if you can make your way there as quickly as you can, please, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, is everybody here that wants to be listening to Nick today? Like, we might as well kick it off. We're about 2 or 3 minutes early, but I'm here to introduce Nick. He's a general manager of Beef and Lamb Market Development Team, and there's been quite a big refresh happen at Beef and Lamb as to the story that they put together. And we've actually just seen the what's that called? The Taste Pure Nature of New Zealand. So Nick's been involved in that very heavily, and so I'll just leave it to you, Nick, and you can take us through the story. Cool.
Awesome. But thank you, and thanks for the invite to speak here today. So what I'm going to be going through today is really setting a bit of the context that we've seen around the world with talking to consumers, how that's influenced our thinking, and then I'll go a little bit deeper into how we've constructed it or built the Origin brand, Taste Pure Nature, alongside the sector, and then our initial thinking into how that will be activated in the marketplace. There'll be plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion, and I think, following on from Anne and her excellent presentation this morning, there is the world of food and the world of meat